I have another scary story to share with you. I was overseas and was in Asia, walking around in an area I wasn't familiar with that I was visiting, and I found out that I turned the wrong way and could not find my way back. So I got kind of freaked out. I don't like being lost, especially when I don't have a map to help me orient myself, which is one of the nice things about Singapore. You can get a map for free to help you orient if you're in the main tourist area of Singapore. And so I was just like freaking out, trying to figure out how to get back. I couldn't. And then I saw in the distance across a field, I saw what looked like something that was familiar to me. I thought, oh my God, if I can just get there. But I couldn't figure out how to get there, using the roads. So instead, I decided, well, I'm going to walk through this field, and that'll take me there the fastest. So I thought this was a good idea. Well, after getting partway into the field, I discovered it wasn't such a great idea because the field was pretty muddy. And it was difficult to traverse it, but I was partway through, so I felt like, well, I'm fully committed now. I'm not going to go back. I walked all the way across, and I came to the backyard of a residence. There was no fence, and so I went in to that backyard, and I start walking into the yard, and somebody comes out and in a very tersely addresses me, saying, "What are you doing in my yard?" I was like, "Oh shit! Oh my God! I'm sorry. I'm not from here. I got lost, and I thought I saw something over here that was familiar, so I went through the field to try and get to what was familiar, so I could get back to where I belong, and I ended up in your yard, and I'm so sorry." And the guy was like, "Oh, okay, I understand. It's, do you walk through that field? That's really muddy. Oh my gosh!" And so the guy invited me into his home to clean up, and there was another guy there too. And so I cleaned up, and then they said, "Well, before you go, let's sit down and talk. It's not every day I get to talk to somebody who actually speaks English like I do." Because, of course, in this country, English wasn't the dominant language. And so, I've been I lived in Indonesia for a really long time. And so it's very customary when you have a guest, even an unexpected guest, although usually not through the backyard, that you'll invite them to sit down, and you'll give them something to eat, to snack on, and maybe a beverage. And if they're trying to impress you, they'll give you water with syrup or tea with too much sugar. Either way, it's really, really obnoxiously sweet most of the time. And so it's like, oh, okay. And so I started talking to these two gentlemen, and they were very nice, very pleasant. We had an interesting conversation, talked about a bunch of different stuff. And then as we were sitting there talking, my attention gets drawn to the window to the backyard because I saw a flash of light. And I look, and I see that there's a group of people in a big circle back there, and there's light flashing from them. And it wasn't like flashlights. It wasn't dark. This light was brighter than the sunlight, and it was not being emitted by anything that I could see. I was like, what? And then I was like totally freaked out because I saw lightning go from one person and hit the tree that that another person was standing in front of. And I was like, oh my God. And I watched it, and it happened a few more times. And I asked the two guys, and they were like, "Don't worry about it. It's fine. They're just practicing." I was like, "What?" And I was so flabbergasted and astonished. I just sat there watching through the window as again and again each person, there was this light flashing from them, and then sometimes somebody would shoot lightning and it would hit the tree and periodically they would shift positions. A different person would be by the tree. It was always directed toward the person at the tree, but never hitting the person. I was like, I've heard some crazy things about like magic, black magic, and things like that in Indonesia, supernatural creatures, and I'd never seen anything like this. I'd seen some fraudulent stuff, but I'd never seen something that was clearly not fraudulent. And I think my jaw was probably on the floor. I was just so surprised. So after a while, they got done and they came inside. And I hadn't noticed, but the two guys had set up a bunch of food. And so they came inside and to eat. And I ended up talking to one of the women that was in that group. And I asked her about it. And she was explaining it to me. And that they were practicing using it. And, this was years ago, so I really can't give you any details. But it was just the weirdest, coolest experience ever. And I had a really good conversation with her. She was very kind and patient, listening to me, answering my questions and stuff. And so eventually they all finished eating and they all left. And so it was just me and the two guys again. And we talked a little bit more. And then one of the guys said something about something in the backyard. And I hadn't remembered seeing it. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go outside and check it. So I put my phone on the table, and I grabbed my shoes and put them back on and walked out there, and I didn't see that. But I walked over to the corner where there was an intersection, and it wasn't busy, and there was this tiny pony. I'd never seen a pony so small in my life that was kind of running around. And when it saw me, it got really excited and came bouncing on over to me. I mean, it was almost like watching a dog, And it laid down on the ground so I could rub its belly. It was like, do you know you're a pony? And it obviously didn't respond, but it was really, really nice. And then suddenly it jumps up and pushes me out of the road, and there's a whole bunch of traffic. Now, when I say traffic, this was a very rural area. So the traffic was like horse carts and water buffaloes pulling carts and bicycles and stuff like that, motorcycles. But still, some of them do move pretty fast. And there are a lot of accidents in Indonesia that result in serious injuries and fatalities. In fact, a few years ago, one of my wife's favorite cousins, she and her husband were driving recklessly, and they had a fatal crash. And when I say fatal, neither of them walked away from it because, they died, which really sucked. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to stay away from the intersection. So I start, walking back to the back door. And the other guy, who it turned out was the first guy's friend, the owner's friend, he didn't actually live there. He comes out, and his demeanor has changed from being very friendly and approachable and stuff. He's looking at me in a very kind of aggressive way. And he's like, I was like, where are my shoes? And he's like, you don't need your shoes anymore. I was like, what are you talking about? And I was just totally, and he was like really intensely exuding hostility, aggression. And I'm not an aggressive person. So I was really freaked out. Um, so I was like, okay, this is getting weird. So I'm going to just get out of here. So reflexively, when I got to the door, I took my shoes off, not thinking, because I didn't want to get the mud on from the shoes on the floor, the inside the house, and I didn't know if what was going on. I thought maybe they'd had an argument or something. So I get inside, and I'm looking for my phone. I can't find it, and the owner's there, and I ask, well, where's my phone? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't, and don't worry about it. And I was like, no, I gotta leave. I gotta get out of here. And he's like, no, you're not leaving. You're not going anywhere. You're staying here. I'm like, no, I'm leaving. So I couldn't go back to the back door to get my shoes because the friend was inside the door and kind of blocking me. And I just felt very intimidated. So I didn't want to approach him because I thought maybe he was going to attack me. So I was like, well, I need my phone. And they were just like totally not cooperative. The owner was getting aggressive too. So finally, I just ran out the front door. And I ran and I just was trying to make sure they couldn't follow me and stuff. And eventually I get to a police station. I'm like, oh, gosh, thank you. So I go in there and I start talking to them. And I said, I explained what happened and that they were, being very, very suddenly very weird and aggressive with me. And I couldn't find my phone, which I had left on the table, and I couldn't get my shoes. And they could see I wasn't wearing shoes. And so they listened to me and they said, okay, well, we're going to help you, because in a lot of countries, tourists, it's important to keep the tourists kind of happy. So the police, if there's a situation where there's a victim, many countries, the police will try to help. And they'll take it quite seriously. So they were like, oh, yeah, okay, let's go. And so we all get into some, on some vehicle, motorcycles, and we go, and I take them to the car, to the house, which I somehow miraculously managed to remember how to get back there, and they're like, "You're sure this is the house?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'm sure. This is, yeah, I recognize it." And they're like, "Are you sure it's really this one?" And I said, well, let's knock on the door. If it's not the guy that I talked to, the guys that I talked to earlier, then I'm wrong. But otherwise, So they went up to the door, and sure enough, the owner answers the door, and they ask him. They apparently know him, and they ask him, "Is there anybody else with you?" And he was like, "No, I'm alone." And they said, "Do you know this guy?" I said, "No, I have no idea who he is. Why? What's wrong?" And they say, well, he claims that he was in here and you and somebody else were being really aggressive toward him, and you took his phone and he couldn't get his shoes. And the guy was like, I have no idea what he could possibly be talking about. And I heard him kind of whisper to the guy something about drugs. And I was like, that really made me angry. But there was nothing I could do about it. So they went in. Obviously, they didn't invite, they one or a couple of the police officers stayed with me outside, and the others went inside, and they were in there for 5-10 minutes, came back out, and they said, sorry, we didn't see your phone, we didn't see your shoes, you must have been mistaken or something, and so we all went back to the police station. And I was really frustrated because I knew it was the right place because it was that guy. And even if I hadn't gotten a really good look at the house, or the front of the house, which I hadn't, I admit, it was him. It couldn't be any other house because it was his house. So I ranted and raved for a while, and then I went outside to cool off. And so I'm standing in the doorway of it's like in Indonesia, a lot of times the space is at a premium because we're talking about islands, right? So there's usually like no space between buildings. It's like wall to wall to wall to wall. And so next to the police station was a shop. So I was standing in the doorway of the shop, just psychologically distancing myself. And suddenly I see the other man, the one who'd been really aggressive to me in the backyard. He goes, and he's in a police uniform. And I'm like, oh my God. So I turn away before he looks in my direction because I was pretty sure, not entirely sure, but I was pretty sure that he hadn't seen me. And so, yeah, I turned away. And I wait until he's inside, and I peek inside, and yeah, sure enough, it's the guy. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm in so much trouble because this guy is a police officer. Now, again, this is the other guy, not the owner, the other guy. And so I'm like totally confused about what I should do. So I stay outside, and eventually he leaves. He goes off on duty or whatever. And a female officer comes out, and she says, "Hey, the police chief wants you to use his car to get wherever it is you're going, and these are his keys. He called me up and he said you should do this, and she explained that the police chief was the owner of the house. I like almost lost my mind at that moment. I was like, what? So I knew I was in really, really bad trouble. And I automatically did not trust this police officer because of the situation. And I'm sure you can imagine. I mean, so she's saying, well, at first she said that the car was at the house. But then she changed her story and said, oh, it's at this other place. And I'll walk you partway there. I got to go in that direction anyways for my job. And so I'm like really not interested in walking with her, but I can't really say no thank you anyways because I'm also not sure about how to get back to my hotel. And I have no intentions whatsoever of going to that car because I feel like it's 100% a trap. Even if there is a car, something bad's going to happen. I mean, what would you think? I mean, what would you do? Write in the comments, please. So this was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I've had a few scary. I was surrounded by a fireball once that came out of an oven. I had one time where I was riding a motorcycle with my wife driving, and somebody tried to snatch my camera and caused us to crash. But this just was far and away worse. So we were walking along, and she's talking really nicely and being very friendly and stuff like that. And I'm just kind of like, pretending because I don't want her really to get the idea that I'm going to run off and so we go a ways, and eventually she said, okay, I got to go this way. And she said, that's the way you need to go to get to where the car is parked. I said, okay, thank you. Have a great day. And I started walking off in that direction. And as soon as she disappeared from my sight, I turned and went in a completely different direction. I wanted to get as far away from where that car was staged as I could, and from her and from the police station, and get to somewhere where I would be safe. Find a taxi, and unfortunately, again, it was a rural area. There were no taxis there, and I didn't know where there was public transportation that would get me back to my hotel, which was far away. I don't like doing normal tourism stuff. I don't like it. It's often staged. It's often overpriced. And so I'd rather see normal day-to-day life, meet people, try authentic foods. So yeah, so I start going around, and I get turned around, and I see some young men, and I go over to them to ask them for help. And they were, at first they were like, just kind of chit-chatting with me, and then they asked what's going on because it was clear they could see that I was very upset. And I said, I told them, and they said, oh, yeah, the police here, they're very corrupt. You cannot trust them, which is a common problem in Indonesia. There are many of the police are very corrupt there, from the lowest ranks up to the top ranks. and it's sometimes, you can be in certain areas where it's dangerous. And it's not just the police, it's the military, it's the government in general. There's a lot of corruption, unfortunately. And it's very frustrating for a lot of Indonesians who are not involved in that corruption and are forced to pay bribes and things like that. So they say, well, look, we know a safe place that we can take you to, and then we'll help you get back to your hotel. So I'm like, okay, because they seemed like really nice people. They seemed legitimate, and at this point, it was risking getting caught by the police or hiding out with these guys until we could figure out a way to get me to safety. So I followed them. They took me to this apartment, and we're in there, kind of relaxing, and then suddenly we hear people trying to get in, and so I'm like, "What are we doing?" They said, "Oh, let's go in the back room and hide back there." And so we go to the back room, and I hear they get into the apartment, whoever it is, and it's not one person, it's not two people, it's a group of people. And I'm like, oh, and then I hear a couple of voices that I recognize from the police station as being police officers. And I'm like, oh no, they followed me. They found me here. So clearly they had been surveilling me as I was walking around and stuff to see what I would do and where I would go and stuff like that. And so they had managed to corral me, so to speak, in this apartment. I'm like totally freaked out, but I'm like, I can't get these guys involved. So I say, just stay here. I'm going to go out. And so I go out, and one of the cops is like being really friendly with me, and he's like chatting with me, and it's like, I don't know if he's one of the ones that's trustworthy or if there are any that are trustworthy. So finally, I just make my way out of the apartment, and I take off. And obviously I'm here now. And the reason I'm here now, and this is really, really important that you understand this, there's one specific reason that I'm here to tell you this story. Because this story happened in my dreams last night. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.